welcome to the Building a World-Class Sales and Marketing Organisation with Roger Fair. For those who don't know Roger, I've just actually had the pleasure of meeting him. I'll give you a bit of his bio. So Roger is a highly experienced professional with significant international experience. His expertise covers all aspects of organisational leadership, sales and marketing management, strategic planning, business processes, improvement and solution sales, including enterprise software within fast-paced leading edge technology environments. With a market-driven approach, Roger has helped organisations throughout Australia, UK and New Zealand to understand what they're really good at, then executing agreed plans accordingly. Marketing sales is his main priority driver, yet he's had significant executive, regional directorship experience and responsibilities. Roger has also served as an executive, non-executive and advisory board member for multiple operations and provided expert advice on growth and exit strategies, structural operations and communications. So today you're in very good hands. Just as a quick overview, Roger will be going through target market customers, defined offerings, sales and marketing approaches and methodologies, prospect identification and lead generation, pipeline management, compiling events and closing, account management, sales operation and sales management. And just earlier when I was chatting to him, he said there's so much content. I believe it was 600 days and 60 minutes of, I suppose, experience. So I now have the pleasure of handing it over to Roger.
Thanks very much, Rachel. First of all, can everybody hear me who's online? Gets us an affirmative. Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to come along today. I always like to work with organisations who are the future, obviously, particularly in this state. Thanks very much also, Rachel, for the intro. Just have a slide here, perhaps, to summarise some of the other things that we've had. So Rachel's already covered a lot of this, so I don't need to, but yes, over 4 decades in the IT industry. Sometimes I feel I've been in the industry longer than the industry, but people say, and you'd all equate with this, how can you be in one industry for 40 years? And I'd say I haven't. I've been in 40 industries for 1 year, because obviously the industries we work in are so fast changing. You know, obviously I'm from New Zealand originally, don't hold that against me, but long-term resident of Brisbane, but also spent the last 5 years of my professional life in the UK setting up the operation there. I've been fortunate to work with 3 Brisbane-based success stories in IT. The first was in the 1990s with a company called AMS, which for those of you who know Data3 today, they were the predecessor to Data3 really in the state. They were Hewlett-Packard's largest reseller throughout Australia, based out of Brisbane, went on to become Volante, Commander, etc. Second one was a GIS company called Ursus, again successful, sat on the board there as well, and a successful exit for that. And probably the one that you most are aware of, or the company you're aware of, is probably Technology One. So I ran the sales and marketing for Technology One for around about 10 years after setting up the New Zealand operation, and then went to the UK to set up that operation, coming back 2 years ago. Having left Tech One, I've moved into a portfolio role. You know, I sit on currently 6 advisory boards. I chair 3 of those advisory boards, as well as doing the mentoring for growth. And I've also been on the Ignite Ideas panel, so seen very much, you know, the type of organisations that you are coming through the ranks on that. I think for time, I won't go around the room or the virtual room introducing. I have actually looked at your profiles and that, so I get a feel for who you all are. But if we get an opportunity later, or if you want to give me a call or whatever, happy to chat through that. So we're here to talk today about the elements of a successful sales organisation, and thank you, Rachel, for the introduction, which is there is about 600 days worth of content, which today we're going to try and cover in 60 minutes. So we're going to gloss across virtually a table of contents But really to try and say what is that, you know, why do we need a sales organisation? You know, the things that we're going to be covering from is, so we're going to talk about why we need a sales organisation, very quickly, the markets and offerings, the buyer's journey, as we say, lead gen, pipeline management, compelling events, closing, customer success and upselling, sales strategy, marketing, operation, and then finally, how do we go about building the sales organisation? So, a rhetorical question perhaps for the group here, but why do we need a sales organisation? Does anybody want to proffer some ideas on why we should have one? You know, we're all in sort of startup mode here. We've done well to get to where we are through entrepreneurial spirit, technical expertise, and probably, and I'll challenge this concept at the end of today's session, some, you know, streetwise sales smarts to get where we are today.
I think we want to, well, we're about selling our business and the price of our business.
Yeah.
And so essentially to scale it, we're in about in my case, we really need to scale up the business development side of the business for the B2B aspects.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Any others? Well, I mean, there are a few, and that's very true. But first and foremost, predictable revenue. You know, we live probably, and I'm sure not the people in this room or virtual room worry about where's next year's revenues coming from. But what we need to do is have predictable revenue. That's not only for our own, you know, so we sleep at night, but also, you know, as we move forward, moving more into perhaps an M&A side of things, this is what investors are looking for as well. We want profitable sales. You know, too often we see in the sales environment very much a case of, oh, you know, if we could just give this away to this customer, they promise they're going to buy a lot more in the future, and these sort of things, all heavily discounted, what have you. We need to know who we're selling to. In the little bio that Rachel said, that probably one of the strengths I've had over the years is helping organisations understand what they're good at. And suddenly a lot of eyebrows go up at times when I say that. But a lot of organisations honestly don't really understand what it is their core strengths. So knowing the target customers, the market size and type. Of course, in the world we live in, which is very much the majority of you in the SaaS world, or at least in a recurring revenue world, you know, to be able to get that first customer and then land, expand and explode, of course, is the latest parlance in this sort of area. Again, the world of SaaS or recurring revenue, our life starts and ends in 1 year increments. Different from the old days whereby, you know, you sell a multi-million-dollar piece of software to a customer for 10 years and just try and keep them tolerably happy. Our life doesn't work like that anymore. Every year or every month, customers have an opportunity to say, no, I don't want to deal with you anymore for whatever reason. So we need to reduce churn and find a way to do that. And we want to be masters of our own destiny. And I said that before. We want to be able to have, you know, there is that hackneyed saying that says you should run your business every day as if you're going to sell it tomorrow. And you want to be that's not necessarily from an operational point of view, but a thought process point of view of how do we become masters of our own destiny. So what are we waiting for? Why can't we just go out there, start talking to prospects? And in the immortal words of Jeremy Clarkson, what could possibly go wrong? So what tends to happen in organisations who are founder-led, and I'm basically grouping the group today here, is, as I said, you've done well because you've got technical expertise, you've got knowledge of market, you've got customers, and you've got some streetwise sales capability, either probably from yourselves, but also within your organisation to get yourself started somehow. You know, you should all have at least one customer as well, sort of saying, and I'm sure you do. What tends to happen is we get to a level, we get to that post-startup level or even the startup level, getting towards scale up and say, The only way to then go to the next level is to employ salespeople to get out there and sell what we have. And that's generally when it all ends in tears. Because all of a sudden you're bringing people from the outside to your organisation without necessarily the structure, the market focus, the product focus, and all the other things that go with it. And that's the reason that we actually need to build the world-class sales organisation as we build the sales capability. So this is an ad from the 1950s, which has become quite iconic. It was from McGraw-Hill, which is a technical journal, if you like, a scientific journal. And it was an ad in their journal to say why you should advertise with us. But it actually still holds true today that you're going out there, you're hiring salespeople or whatever. And then you say, right, now go out there and sell. And of course, it's, you know, the person you're selling to, as you can see, very much a 1950s CEO or head of department. I don't know who you are. I don't know your company. I don't know your company's product. I don't know what your company stands for. I don't know your company's customers. I don't know your company's track record. I don't know the company's reputation. Now, what was it you wanted to sell me? Now, that even holds true today, some 60, 70 years later. But a modern take on this, I don't care who you are. If you're cold calling me, it's going to go directly to voicemail. If I can't find you easily online, I don't know anything about you. If you're not top of mind, you won't make my shortlist. Your content isn't helpful. You're excluded from the game. And if you're not a thought leader, then you're just a commodity. Now, do you really believe in yourself? So, you know, this is the whole thing that we've got to challenge with. So the first thing that I believe, and I always start my presentation at workshops with this, when people say, can you come in and help us, you know, build our sales organisation? And my question back is, well, tell me who your markets are and what your offerings are. And most people say, well, it's easy. We have this and that, and we sell to a few of these. The conversation goes for about 2 minutes. It becomes unclear as to what. So I really do believe that the first thing to do is to really take a good hard look at what I call the 7 Ps market. Now, this is my own take on it. Originally, anybody who's done Marketing 101 will know about the 4 Ps from E. Jerome McCarthy, who was a university lecturer through the 1960s in the US, who came up with the first concept of the marketing matrix and called the 4 Ps. And the 4 Ps were know about your product, know about the place, promotion and price. Everybody has their own. I've added my own as well. The ones I've added as well, for instance, obviously it's all about people, who you're selling to. You've got to know your competition and also what's your process of going to market. So when we're talking about product, it's not just product, it's solution offering. What are the combinations of solution offerings? Now, a lot of you, I realize from the point of view, are almost, I won't call single product sensitive, that's the wrong word, but you've got a direct offering, therefore you've got one product. But even within that product, there's a certain bill of materials that comes with that. Like, is there professional services that go with consultancy, for instance? Is there a scaled version of your SaaS product? Have you got a premium product? Have you got a growth product? Have you got an enterprise product? So what are all those? And are we certain when we're selling those that what we've got that? Because if you employ a salesperson tomorrow, that's exactly what we're going to ask for. Where's my catalog? Where's my price book and whatever? And that's why it often ends in tears, because we haven't got any of these artifacts on day one. So that's the first thing, is knowing what it is. Market focus is absolutely critical, and it's one thing I 100% believe in, is vertical markets or industry markets and geography markets as well. A little bit of war story about my time at Tech One. When I first joined Technology One, they believed they had the world's best financial management system, and they can sell to anybody. This was back in the early 2000s, and I guess it was myself that brought to them this concept of focus on the markets that you're really good at. And it shouldn't just be one, because then you're single point sensitive. But I do believe that there's probably, around about between 5 and 7 is the optimum amount. And they should all be like 2 degrees of separation. What I mean by that, you shouldn't 1 minute be selling to a bank and next minute to a manufacturing organisation. if you're generally in the services industry or perhaps the health industry. If you're in health, and there's a number of you in the room, virtual room, who are in health, for instance, that's a good example now. Is it, GP practices, is it hospitals, is it PhDs, etc., etc. So this is the sort of degrees of separation, but we should get to about between 5 and 7 of these. Promotion. Everybody thinks marketing is promotion. That's what I say. Oh, we've got to have an advertising strategy. Yes, we've got to have a marketing strategy, very much a social media strategy these days, but it's got to be very much aligned to these two top things that we have. People, understanding the personas and the buyers. We'll talk about that briefly. Who are the people we're actually selling to? From a point of view, customers, the end user. The end user's got tremendous power these days. It didn't used to have 20, 30 years ago because it was a case of selling IT was to go to the decision maker and they'll tell these end users what they're going to buy. It's very much collaborative these days. The person who is in the front line utilising the application or the service is very much key. And of course, the buyers being buyer personas, and we'll talk about that very briefly today, but in another session we might deep dive into that a bit more. Predators, very important. Why? Because A, we've got to know who else is in the market. But what we should be able to do is look at what they do, borrow from them, because everybody else does that to you as well. But then the key is make them irrelevant. Those of you who have read a book called The Blue Ocean Strategy, which I thoroughly recommend, is how do we create uncontested market space to make the competition irrelevant? What is it, our magic source, if you like, that does that? And of course, process, how do we get to market? What's our sales ops process? What's our go-to-market process? If we're a SaaS product, do we have a release cycle process that we can use as part of our promotional strategies, etc.? And of course, finally, pricing and pricing strategies. But pricing strategies have got to be definitive, they've got to be clear, and they've got to be very clear to everybody, including the customer. So I would strongly recommend that before you start on any building the world-class sales organization, you get these things in play. And again, in another session, we'll probably deep dive a little more on those. So then let's talk about the buyer's journey. Slightly hackneyed again. This industry is great at making things hackneyed, inventing three-letter acronyms or new terms for everything at a drop of a hat. But nonetheless, the buyer's journey is, I suppose the buyer's journey was first sort of introduced, I think, by people like BMW in the days who managed to, stay in contact with customers right throughout the whole life cycle, way before they even thought of buying, their first BMW. But effectively, the buyer's journey is the buyer's life cycle. It doesn't just stand, well, it starts obviously with people that are unaware of you and you're unaware of you. But it doesn't just finish with the sale, of course, the initial purchase, it then continues on, and we'll talk about that towards the end of the latest term in the market is customer success. Now, there's a lot of sales methodologies out there. And unfortunately, everybody who writes a sales methodology, or as importantly, a sales methodology book, tends to say that theirs is the best and the only methodology to use. A lot of them are very good, a lot of them are very ordinary, but the ones I've found over the years, a few of the sample books here, and I'll quote from some of these as we go on, but each of these has their own particular place, if you like, within the buyer's journey. Back in the day, of very much today, where customers are unaware and moving to awareness. A couple of things there. The world of social media, and I'll come on to that in a moment, has made that the customers are very much aware of you and yourselves when they start their journey. So our key is to get to as close to them to being unaware as we can and work with them on that journey. So to begin with, there's a book called Disruptive Selling, which talks about how social media now comes in and the role of salespeople has changed from sending out brochures and whatever to actually adding value. A great book called Shift, which talks about shattering the status quo. Going to customers when they don't realise they have a problem, and not making a problem for them, but making them aware of that particular problem or what have you, or a change in circumstance for the customer, such as a change in CEO, change in key personnel. Through into the whole pipeline management sailing, and I won't cover these in any detail today because we don't have time. And some of the methodologies which were born in the 90s, or 80s, such as spin selling, which was solution selling. Spin stood for situation, problem, implication, and need. Very much through into the more modern way of the challenger sale, which effectively, instead of asking the question, you take the expert approach based upon what you know in the marketplace, and do a thing what's called commercial teaching. Also, some very long-term methodologies, strategic selling, which was the first methodology to identify persona buyers, which we'll talk about, and also a qualifying methodology called MEDDIC, which you might hear bandied around the marketplace. As I say, these are all really good methodologies, but they're really relevant or pertinent in particular areas of the buyer's journey. And then moving further ahead, moving towards, after the initial purchase, how do we, make those customers not only just horribly happy with us, but how do they become advocates and referenceable? And we see things like the words like customer success, and then expand that, and virtually this becomes, instead of just a straight line, it becomes a loop where we go back through the customer cycle again. So what happens is we then need to be able to have the right balance of marketing, sales, and marketing again. And I get a little bit annoyed again in this generation. Got a lot to thank Salesforce for. Well, we've got a few things to thank Salesforce for, and a lot to chastise them on, because they set themselves up as the oracle around modern SaaS-based selling, if you like. And so every year and a half, their employees at Salesforce, I think, have left to write books, over time. So they've come up with all this concept you might hear of marketing qualified leads and sales qualified leads. I don't believe there is any difference. A lead is a lead is a lead. All it is where they are in your pipeline. And so it's a matter of having that journey and the problem with talking about that term comes the age-old thing of marketing's over one side of the room and sales is over, and never the twain shall meet. And universities teach that, by the way. So, what we've got to find is a way that these two bodies, if you like, are inextricably linked. Hence the overlaps that you can see. So if we looked at the buyer's journey more in what happens over that period of time, the buyer's journey is actually, can be brought down. And this is almost starting to look at where pipeline management comes in. You can see if you look at the funnel, it looks a bit like this. We'll go on to that in the next part. But it effectively, the buyer's journey is certainly just one straight line. Of course, it goes over a period of whatever time you want to allocate. Now, if you're an enterprise provider of some form, that buyer's journey can be as much as 3 years. But even if you're a point solution, which is the lower end, it's still a long time. And people get confused because they say, oh no, well, that's not the way we work. It's because we do an inquiry and we send out a quote and we run into that. But the issue is there that, in fact, what we're actually talking about is this is where first contact with the customer. Sorry, I'm pointing at tender docs required or proposal requested. And then we say, how many proposals do we send out? We send out, maybe out of every 10 proposals, how many do we win? We win about 2. So we're wasting 80% of our time. So the question is now, how do we get right back to the top of that pipeline where business as usual happens, moving through into internal review, external interest, initial plan internally with the customer. They then start to do some peer referencing, and then they do vendor referencing. And this is the first case. About here is where they're starting to research you on the web. You don't know about them just yet, but this is where they're looking. They then start to talk to the vendors. That's when you first engage, generally. Preparing a business case, get it approved, putting a project plan in place, tend to, now as I say, this is an enterprise journey, and so some of the terms may change, but it's still the same principle. So how do we go about identifying prospects and lead generation? So the prospects is, who should we sell to? And I have 5 qualifiers that I've used over the years and have worked very well for the businesses I've been with. So the first thing is the prospect in our target market? And that's what's so important, to actually do that first exercise we talked about, identifying your target markets and the product matrix within that, who do we sell to? Because the worst thing, you get a lot of inbound inquiries, I'm sure. And then suddenly it's, oh, look, there's this guy down the road, and we've never sold to this sort of market before, but he's really interested in what we do, so maybe we should do that. You've got to hold true to where you believe, you know, your product fits. And the problem you have, you may be able to do that yourself because you just say, well, when you're hiring salespeople, they'll invent all sorts of weird and wonderful reasons to do this. So you've got to be true. So are they in our target market? And by target market, we talk about the industry markets that we spoke about, you know, health, government, private practice, whatever it might be. And geographies, also very important. Where do we sell? Do we sell in Queensland? Good. Do we sell in the US? Do we not sell in? Sorry. Oh, okay. Is that because I'm wandering away from the microphone? Okay. Sorry. I apologise for that. I won't wander away from the microphone. Hopefully everybody's okay with that. I'll stand here. Yeah, that's right. As I say, target geographies, you know, do we sell in, you know, Australia? Yes. Do we sell to New Zealand? Probably. Do we sell to the US? Maybe. You know, do we sell in places like South Africa with a very poor exchange rate? No. And et cetera, et cetera. So you've got to be fairly hard-nosed about this and where you're targeting those geographies as well. So yes, if you qualify that way as well. Do we have a solution for their problem? And again, this should be self-evident. Well, not necessarily should be, but appears to be self-evident, but it often isn't, because our customers asked if we could possibly do this for them. And maybe if we bent the product a little bit and configured it and did this, perhaps we could sell that. No, if it's not self-evident, if it's not effectively out of the box, and I'm not talking about configuration now, I'm talking about what the actual product does, then that's not what we have. So we have a defined problem and need and a defined solution for that. And that's why that product market matrix is so important to develop. Money. Is the prospect, 2 things about money. One is the organisation of the right size for us? Now, size is generally regarded as, oh, are they too small? But it applies on the other side as well. You know, suddenly Queensland government's come out for an all-of-government solution 4, or even worse, federal government's come out for an all-of-government solution 4, and you know, there's a 2-year proposal process we've got to go through, and shortlisting and whatever else. You know, sounds good. Maybe partnering could be the answer, but there is a concept of being too big. So one of the things is I'll talk about there's a thing called, again, thanks to our industry, an ICP, which again has been interested as a 3-letter acronym, which stands for Ideal Customer Profile. I tend to make it a colloquial thing to say the magic customer. What does your magic customer look like? You know, do you have one at the moment, or what would it look like? What is their size? What's their type? What's their attitude, and whatever else? So that's important around this. So first of all, the organisational department size, etc., sweet spot, and then of course the thing in the term we're talking about now is, do they have the money to buy it? Do they have the budget allocated, etc.? Then does the prospect have are we talking to the right people? Now, are we talking to the right people within the organisation? That's obviously vital. And as we'll talk about, there are around about 5 or 6 people involved these days in any purchasing decision. So it's not just the CEO or the departmental user or the IT manager. It's a lot of people. So it's within that. But within the organisation itself, does the organisation have the authority to buy? And this might sound absolutely self-evident, but you know, if you're selling to Queensland government and you get right down to the thing and they say, oh, by the way, are you on the vendor panel? Oh, no, we're not. Oh, sorry, we can't buy from you because of that. And that's self-evident. But what happens also if you're dealing with, say, subsidiaries of a US corporation and people fall in love with your product here in Queensland or in Australia and they say, yes, we want to go ahead. We just have to check, okay, with our head office. And they say, sorry, we have a worldwide agreement with XYZ competitors generally based in the country of origin and that sort of thing. So you've wasted all of that time and effort. So that's why it's important to understand that. That authority to buy. So the theory is that every single prospect, every single person you do and you do those first 4 targets will buy at some stage in the cycle. And if you're doing things right, there's no reason why that shouldn't be you. Right? It could be 10 years out, it could be 3 years out, it could be 3 months out. The last one though is the thing to say, where do you put your effort? Because this is the thing, we'll talk about this towards the end of the session. Is there a compelling event? What is the thing that's going to make it so that the customer, you know, says, yes, this is what we have to do? And it can be very simple things. I'm working with one startup scale-up at the moment, and the founder there has discovered that having like February specials just to get a customer off the line actually works. Now it's a little thing, a bit like walking into Myers or something and saying, oh, sale this week only. I mean, they have sales this week only every week. But it's that mental thing. It can be as simple as that. But it's other things like timeframes. We'll talk about that at the end of the session. But is there an identified compelling event as to why this customer at some stage in the future, 3 months, 3 years, will actually make that decision? That's the hardest thing for salespeople to do, and the hardest thing for salespeople particularly to enact upon as well. So if you're going to bring a prospect into your pipeline, you should have at least 4 of those 5, and I'm saying that the 5th one is not actually a qualifier, it's actually a timeline, into your pipeline. If you cannot justify those other 4, then don't bring the prospect in, which is why pipelines get clogged with all sorts of weird, wonderful names who you're never going to sell to, but they just get in there because somebody called and they're interested or whatever else. These are the qualifiers that we should really go through each and every time. So let's talk about the reality of the modern buyer. And here, this is a compiled book, and the book is on the right-hand side there. Is to all the research that's gone on in recent times. And we're really talking about the modern buyer, and this is what I said about the spin selling methodology, which still is valid today, but has become a little dated in terms of its approach. Because what spin selling used to do is say, get an appointment with a customer for a couple of hours, sit down in front of them and ask them what keeps them awake at night, what their business does, how many employees they have, and you know, what are their key sort of markets, etc. Worked well in the 80s and 90s. Why doesn't it work so well today? What's the big thing we have today that we didn't have in the 80s and 90s? The internet. If you have a salesperson or you're a salesperson, you walk into a customer and say, tell me about your business. Tell me about the turnover and that sort of thing. You're probably going to be shown the door in the first 30 seconds because if the buyer is smart, and most of them are these days, they say, if you haven't done that basic research, then why are you here? So as you can see on the left-hand side, that before research shows that before a customer even makes contact with you, they've done 57% of the research of the buyer's journey already. As I mentioned before, 5.4 people are now involved in the average B2B buying decision. So classic thing is you go to a pipeline with a salesperson and you say, well, who's our contact here? Oh, it's Fred. Get on like a house on fire with Fred because he's rang us up and he said he's looking at that. What's Fred for? Oh, he's a sort of assistant department manager doing some work on behalf of who's the CEO? I don't know. Who's the technical buyer, etc. So we talk about the buyer personas, if you like, as to the average ones, and you can pretty much pin them. Yes, who's the decision maker? Often the decision maker won't be a decision maker; it'll be a decision panel. A lot of consensus-based buying these days. Who's the user buyer? Who's the person using them? Who's the technical buyer? Technical buyers are generally the IT manager, generally the IT manager or CIO. Generally, technical buyers will not win you a deal, but they can lose you the deal. Right? You've got right through the whole process. Sorry, we're a Microsoft shop and you're on open source, so we're not going to buy from you. Maybe that hits a chord somewhere, etc. 75% of B2B buyers now use social media to research the vendors. Right? 90% of decision makers say they never respond to cold outreach. It's our guy in the first couple of slides there. Hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm here to sell you X, Y, Z. We've got to be smart on that. But 74% of buyers choose the sales rep that first to add value and insight to their buyer's journey. Now, what are the contradictory numbers there? So the customer's done all this research. They've looked at all the buyers. They've said this is it, and they've gone to all those sort of worldwide catalog things that say here the top 10 buyers or the top 10 vendors in this particular market and whatever else. Then they make contact with them. But the first one that adds any form of value to the thing is generally the one they buy from. So the key to it is how do we actually make sure that we're getting into that 57% earlier. Remember I talked about shattering the status quo, getting at the beginning of the part, how do we get to that sort of cold outreach? When I say cold outreach, I don't mean cold call, but actually starting to use the social media to get to these people. And then adding value on that process. And hence where the challenger sale comes in. Start to become the commercial teachers in the world to actually add the value and whatever else. Company, as I mentioned before, the one I'm working with, the SaaS company, they actually have, even though they're a very small company, they have a very good professional services and support area. And they say even competing against US organizations, that's what they're most well known for, because instead of it just being a subscription-based premium model, sign up for our product and figure out how it works through this YouTube video, they have real live people helping through the process. So it's that 74% of adding value. So what is it, our key USPs, unique selling propositions? What are the things that we can add value? What's our battle cards? What are the things that we can actually add value early in that process? So lead gen, that's the first part at the top of the funnel. And obviously we talk about outbound, inbound, web content, email, ads, lots of stuff written about this. Every day you'll be getting somebody from LinkedIn telling you that they can transform your business if you sign up for some other thing that they've just done and all that. Yes, it's all good stuff. The only thing I will say is that the thing I just said, you've got to be able to add value and insight. That's why, obviously blogs and these sorts of things. We used to do a thing called trade shows and conferences. I haven't had a day for some reason about 18 months, 2 years ago, but hopefully it'll come back to a degree. But there is certain aspect of that we can't go away from, and it is a bit annoying again in the modern world. So, the yesterday's salesperson was all about getting out there and making appointments, seeing customers. These days, I can sell to a customer without even meeting them, just sell them by email and tell them how marvelous we are. No, it's not how it works. We don't work with our life that way, and it certainly doesn't work with our customers. There's nothing more to actually add value. Yes, social media can be by Zoom, it can be by phone and that, but talking to the customer, talk to the people as often as possible. There's a blog guy called, I don't know if you've seen him, a guy called Brian Burns, who runs a blog thing called The Brutal Truth. If you follow this quite good, he does his videos walking down the street and he's then to be on phone and talking to things. Gives some really good insights into that sort of behaviour, etc. There is no doubt that social media has transformed the way we sell, and it's been a quick transition. When I say quick, I'm talking the last decade. So the days of, and this is where the disruptive selling stuff comes in, the days of the salesperson in the office getting a brochure, even a hard copy brochure, even a PDF brochure, and sending it to the customer is generally wasted time, if you like. It's got to be more strategic than that, and these are the sort of stats that we're talking about now. So we've got to have very much around the social media, but it's a support tool. It's not the only tool. So then we move into pipeline management. So I tend to run a whole session on pipeline management, but I need to dearly that pipeline management is all about that buyer's journey turned into one of those, and you often see pipelines drawn that way as a squiggle, because that's exactly what it is. So it starts at the thing on a target list. So again, remember what I said at the beginning, it's almost one of those things you do, as Americans term the beer and pizza night. You get around the room with a bunch of people. Who should we sell to? Well, with our target market, oh, what about Fred? And then you very quickly get a prospect list based upon who you want to sell to, not necessarily those inbound leads that come in. They are important because hopefully if you're doing your social media work and you're advertising properly, that they're the people who are looking for you, but do that. So that's where you start your target list. And then you look through the opportunity. So what an opportunity is basically to say we make contact with this customer, we know who the key contacts are. Then moving through a stage called discovery, which means the customer is actively starting to look. Remember we talked about peer referencing and vendor referencing? No, this is the stage where they're actually starting to say, hey, something needs to happen here. Now, this could be 2 years out, it could be 2 months out. You just need to make your own decisions on the nature of the solution you have. Qualified means the project is real. It means that there's been a budget signed off, if it's a fairly major project, it's got a project manager assigned, it's got a timeline and what have you. Government is quite easy because generally these are tenders about to come out. And then we get through to proposal stage. That may be if it's a government style thing, it'll be a tender stage. It might be somebody, can you send me a quote, right? And then we get down to final 2 and then win. As I say, there's a whole methodology. Against each of these things, there's a weighting factor, algorithmic weighting factor, which I have, which works pretty well. But the thing that most people ignore is the fact that time is the biggest thing. So what I mean by that is time and stage go hand in hand. So if you're in an area, let's call it that your people that you way in the universe and going to opportunity, let's say they're 2 years out. May sound a long time, but when you think about some of the opportunities you're working on, some of them could go that length of time. So it's not unreasonable to think that. So if you said opportunities are 2 years out, discovery is probably 18 months out, qualified's 1 year out, proposal 6 months out, final 2-3 months out, and close within a month. Verbal win. Win means verbal win, not the contract finally signed down in the bottom part. If somebody rings you up and says, congratulations, you're our preferred vendor, but we can't do anything for a year, that doesn't mean it's down there. It means it's back up there because time overrides stage. And we'll talk about that as we move forward in some of the other sessions. And also, in our industry, it's not like the insurance industry. This is a fairly narrow, that's why they call it a pipeline rather than a funnel at times. It's actually more of a pipeline than it is a funnel that way. If you're in the insurance sales business, for instance, and just cold calling 100 people, if you cold call 100 people, you get through to 30 of them, of which you might be able to make an appointment with 15, of which shows some interest of 5, and you sell 1, right? Generally, that's not the business we're in, even in the app business, right? So we tend to be much more targeted around, you know, how many deals do we need to be viable? Is it 1 a month? If it's 1 a month, you know, call it 10 a year, then how many leads do we need in our pipeline? Anybody want to hazard a guess? You know, starting at that universe opportunity level, called opportunity.
I'd like to take it back to the other question of, yes, that might be, you know, what your pipeline is with the customers you're targeting now, new business. But if you're starting now, which is the perspective that we take people and move into, you know, startups or scale-ups, and we're starting from now, right? So if our other customer looks and feels like someone's going to be making, you know, the win in 3 years' time, that is not going to work for us. We will not survive. So what we always need to look at is, okay, different customers that are going to meet short time frames with some of those that will come back in the long term.
Exactly right. You can't. Yeah. So sorry. So the question from the room was basically, if we're in a startups phase, and we're struggling to, you know, obviously win business in that, we can't sort of say all of our prospects are going to be 2 to 3 years out, because we don't have 2 to 3 years. So yes, you have to convert the short-term prospects, those leads that come in, those people that you know, and whatever else. And you may have to actually respond to every single proposal. And by the way, that means your win rate is going to be 2 out of 10. All right, we will suffer that and win the 2, even though we're wasting 80% of our time, as we say. Not wasting, but that's the only prospect. The problem is that in 3 years' time, you're doing the same thing, you'll go out of business anyway. So you've got to start this dual strategy of, how do I start building the top of the pipeline now and work that. Now, what I'm saying is that the problem with it is often, if you're spending all of your time at what I call the flying peas, which is the proposal, they fly in, fly out, then you choke the top of the pipeline and you don't bring them back down. So the question I posed before is, how many do you need in the pipeline to sell 10 a year? It's actually about 50. Not 500, not 1,000. That's the important part to know, because if you're doing this right, you'll win about 2 out of 3 of those deals as time goes on. Absolutely. So, you know, what are investors looking for? They're looking at multiples of EBITDA. They're looking at, you know, sales orders. They're looking at long-term contracts or revenue growth, and they're looking at the strength of pipeline and surety of that. And if you don't have that, you just say, oh, look, you know, we get 10 leads a week and we're starting madly to follow each of them up, and, you know, we win 1 or 2. That's not what investors are really looking for. So I spoke at the beginning about the 5 qualifiers and the 4 qualifiers and the compelling event. So who's your biggest competitor? Have you analysed that at all? And I know who it is, by the way. So it's a trick question. Right? Oh, gee, you know, coming in and this guy's, he's just about ready to go, but he's had to take it to his or her boss and to get it finally signed off. And then there's other distractions that we've got, and they've actually put the thing on hold. How often have you heard that story in your journeys in that? Right? So how do we overcome that? How do we make that? Now, some of these things you can't overcome, but at least if you have the knowledge to know what it is, you can actually put them somewhere else in the pipeline. It's one of the most ignored areas, I suppose, is creating compelling events. So in my previous life, I actually created a whole course around this area. So what is a compelling event? A compelling event has an economic owner, a defined date, as direct response to a business pressure. The action is expected to deliver a significant business result. The compelling event defines a reason for the economic owner to act. Okay. Now, I guess what I came up with in these courses I built is to say what are the various sorts of things we have, which are either compelling events or what you perceive to be a compelling event but may not be, but at least you know what it is, if you see what I mean. So just very quickly, what these are, windowing basically means you can't, people don't look forward, they always look back. Or they might look forward, but they don't move things. I said, we must, next financial year, we must have this new system in. And so windowing is saying, okay, well, if next financial year, that means you need to be up and running, say, by March of next year. We're into March of this year. So how long will it take for you to put together some form of proposal or quote or whatever? Probably 3 or 4 months, right? And then how long will it take you to evaluate the vendors you're looking at? Probably another 3 or 4 months and that sort of thing. And then once you start to get it, then how long will it take you to implement? Well, probably about 6 months. Well, there's our year. So we're already behind the 8 ball. We better get out to market now. Customers actually very rarely look at it in that thing. So windowing to say critical dates. What's the critical date somebody has? Oh, it really means everybody wants to be up and running by the financial year if it's some form of financial based product or whatever. Or a particular, everybody wants it by Christmas. Or there's some date. So use the windowing approach. The rest are we will go through in a future session. But the bottom one is important because somebody says, "Could you give me a quote on your product, please?" You know? And so great, this person's wanting to buy it. Fantastic. If you ask the question, why do you want this? And then it's a valid question because what they say is, oh, look, most of the time we want to put it into next year's budget. Great, I'll give you all the options and make sure it's a bigger quote, and then you've got the options to choose from, if you see what I mean, rather than worrying about does it fit in. 99% of salespeople don't ask that question. Yeah, I've got this guy, he's really keen, I'll just give him a quote, and nothing happens. Why is that? So as I say, there's a series of these, but we don't have time to talk through today. Last but by no means customer success. A lot of you have seen these stats about, obviously acquiring a new customer costs 5 times more than retaining an existing customer. Increased customer retention by 5% can increase profits by 25 to 95%. As a success rate of selling to a customer you already have is 60 to 70%, whereas to a new one, 5 to 20, etc. We've got to look after these customers. So again, thanks to Salesforce and others, we used to call it account management and whatever else, and now customer success is a big word. But as I said right up front, the world has changed. The world's changed from a point of view of vendors who used to sell, large one-off products, and then you just keep the customer relatively happy to get them paying the maintenance every year. In the SaaS world or subscription world, it's all about an annual thing at best, and how do you make sure the customers actually not only sign with you again next year, but actually start to buy more from you, if you like. So having, customer success management is really important. There's a concept of attitudinal versus behavioural loyalty. Behavioural loyalty is, there's a corner store just down the road from me, which I stop every day and buy the paper and milk and whatever else because it's there. But if the supermarket opened closer, I'd go to them rather than the corner store. Attitudinal loyalty is I don't care who there's, I'm always going to go to this person. It used to be with hairdressers and people like that. So this is what we need to become. We need to become the attitudinal guys, right? Again, we run a whole session on that, so I'll just make that from that point of view. So building the sales organisation, we'll finish with this. I've got a few minutes now. First of all, what's your organisational structure? This is from an organisation called Sonova, who are an M&A company in the US, and they pretty much, I like this slide because they pretty much summed up how to say. Suspect the majority of you have an organisation which looks something like this on the left-hand side. Owner, founder, co-founder, etc., building up. co-founders tend to work, you do the technical side, I'll do the sales side type of approach. Moving to an organisational structure. So what you should be looking at, I believe, is to start to build your organisational structure that bears the test of time or has the growth capability for, say, the next 5 years. So if you say, okay, we're a $7 million turnover at the moment, but we believe that we need to be going to about 10 million. What does our organisational structure look like for 10 million? Now, when you build this structure, it's going to have a lot of things called TBA or vacant, obviously, or your name appearing 3 times in the thing. But the good news is about it is when you employ the next employee, you don't have to do open heart surgery in the organisational structure. Because what tends to happen if you've got 5 people in the organisation, 3 or whatever, that, Fred does this and this, and Sue does this and this, and Charlie does that and that. And then all of a sudden we employ somebody else, and therefore we say, oh, now, Mary has to do some of this and some of that and that. By actually having the organisational structure on that, you can actually say, yes, I do 3 roles at the moment, but my next hire is going to take some of that pressure off, and we're going to hire that person in that role. The other one's a personal one, and I don't know how many of you suffer this, but that's the question in a moment. A lot of you are fronting your sales effort. And how many times does a customer say, so you're ringing me about sales, why am I talking to the CEO? What sort of company are you? Where you're the CEO is actually the only salesperson. So what you might do is to say I'm the CEO, but I'm also the CRO, which is Chief Revenue Officer. That gets confused with Chief Risk Officer, so you might change it to Chief Commercial Officer. So hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm the Chief Commercial Officer, and then not part-time, I do CEO side as well, but it makes more sense, and then you can actually build the organisation around this. Again, a whole topic on that one, but we won't. So then we come to a thing called sales ops. Sales operations is what we say in the World Cup. We've talked all along about building a world-class sales organisation. And one of the questions that might be posed, why do we need a sales organisation? Why aren't we just talking about employing salespeople? The reason is that the sales organisation is an organisation of its own right, obviously within the organisation, just as you have an R&D and engineering organisation, et cetera, And the elements of sales operations are obviously you need the strategy, but then you need sales management approach, and you need to work through this with all of these areas as well. And then sales ops itself, what CRM are you using? What sales team enablement tools do you have? Sales funnel management, pipeline management. Are you doing things like win-loss reports and sales process progression type steps? That's all within this area called sales ops. Okay, so I'll finish today asking the question. So we've decided we're going to build a sales organisation. So the first thing was that we decided, right, it's time we actually, went out there and built sales capability. Who's your first hire? This is probably a reasonable sort of roles that we can talk about of an organised sales organisation. So who's your first hire? What I might do is pose a question the other way around. And because we're working in a virtual group here and I can't see all of you, I've generally asked for a show of hands. But who at the moment out of all your sales organisations leads the sales effort as founders? Yeah. But I basically say 95% of the people on the call are doing that, right? Yeah. This might sound a silly question to ask.
I've just employed a person in a marketing community sales role.
Yeah, we'll come on to that there. That's one of those ones. Might sound a silly question to ask in following that up, but in that case, who's the best salesperson in your organisation? Right? And hopefully the same hands go up, because otherwise we're in real trouble, right? If you employ all these people over the next 3 years, who will be the best salesperson in your organisation once you've employed that? Yourself, right? So the question is, which order do you do this? And one of the things that I've certainly come to the belief in working with the customers I work in, the role you've just described is often called SDR, thanks to our friends at Salesforce and all this, which is another one of these sales development representative. Again, it used to be things like telemarketing and marketing and all that. The SDR does a lot of that. And almost acting as your own EA for all the fetch and carry stuff you do, as well as doing that lead gen and marketing. Now, obviously, you're on very tight budgets, so to actually make the call to actually go out and employ somebody is a big decision. The good news about this is that you get the right sort of thing. The other problem we have in this industry is that I can tell you the DNA of this gene pool, if you like, of sales is very low and in high demand. If you go out and hire a BDM, which is a common term for salesperson, most of them won't walk through the door even and turn up for work for anything under $100,000 to $120,000 base, and that's a pretty junior type level. And if they actually do anything, you're probably paying them $150,000. So yes, the good ones are good, but they're so thin. And the reason is I've got all sorts of theories as to why this is, which we'll go into in the future. But what an SDR can do is build with your sales organization as well. The other thing is the world is changing. Because there is so much of the transactional and marketing work done online and even sales work, you can start to grow your SDR people into fully fledged salespeople with your help. It also helps you leading from the front to build your organization within as you go. So my recommendation very much would be that, and typically an SDR would be a postgrad university type person who perhaps wants some flexible hours. Their salary range is somewhere between 50,000 to maybe 65 for me, with a bonus package of around about 20,000 if they're performing all the things you want them to perform. So more palatable, but you've got to be prepared to invest time in them, bring them on the journey and give them promotional opportunities, because guess what? They'll become part of that very thin DNA pool and wander off within 6 months or whatever. And that'll happen anyway in some cases. So I think we're on time and under budget still. So thank you for your time today. That's right. Hopefully there's some useful things there. As I say, it was really a table of contents of a fair amount of content that we have to work through. Hopefully you found it interesting. There's my details if you either want to drop me a note, ask anything, happy to do that. So at this stage, I'll hand back to Rachel.
Thank you so much. I know for myself, I was making quite a few notes throughout the way, so I'm sure everyone else got a lot of value from that. But as
I'm happy to give you slides as well to share if that.
Yeah, that would be great. But as mentioned throughout, Roger will be doing a few more sessions with us throughout the year. But if there's anything that anyone online or in the labs specifically would like to ask, please let myself know or let Roger know, and we can do a session around that. But I just, on behalf of RCA, I just want to thank you for coming in.
No problem at all. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.